Welcome to Darkness Notes Coaches, terrifying secrets, and mysterious stories that will make you tremble. Her medical records were burned. Her birth was never recorded, and yet, every patient who touched her remembered things they never lived through. This is the case that made 7 Harvard-trained doctors question not just medicine but time itself. In the snow-choked silence of Millbrook, Massachusetts, something unnatural was being hidden behind brick walls and scripture. The year was 1847, but the horror felt timeless. A woman with no history had arrived, and with her came the unraveling of a carefully built order, the lie of medical progress, the illusion of religious authority, the fragile concept of identity itself. They called her Latoya. She had no surname, no known origin, and no reason for being in the Hartwell barn that morning except for the one none of them dared say aloud. When Silas Hartwell opened his barn doors to find her half frozen and staring through the walls as if she saw what lay behind time, his instinct wasn't to call for help, it was to kneel. She should have died that day. That would have made sense. The frost alone should have taken her lungs. But her breath steamed in the bitter air like smoke from a forge, steady, alive, defiant. And when she whispered to the nurse in that first hour, not in English, but in a hybrid of Yoruba and something lost, the question wasn't who she was. It was what. There are moments in history where institutions lose control, where their polished floors, brass instruments, and holy books become nothing more than props on a stage whose script has been rewritten. Latoya didn't just slip into the infirmary, she disrupted its gravitational center. Dr. Jonathan Aldrich, a man who had spent his life climbing the ivory tower of medical science, found himself descending fast. His journals, written with ink and trembling precision, confessed more than he ever told his colleagues. By the third night, he was no longer recording symptoms, he was chronicling phenomena. You see, this isn't just a case of a strange woman in a strange town. This is the blueprint of something older than medicine, older than faith, a control system that relies on you never asking the right questions. What you're about to hear is the first crack in that system. Latoya didn't come to be healed. She came to awaken. By the 7th day of her stay, the infirmary had changed. The floors creaked less. The shadows in the corners grew longer. The nurses no longer whispered prayers under their breath because they felt safe, but because something was listening, and that something wasn't God. Sister Mary Catherine, trained in medicine and scripture, began to mark her shifts with salt lines at the thresholds, not out of superstition, but pattern recognition. Those who lingered too long in Latoya's presence emerged changed, not always broken, but never the same. They remembered dreams they never had, suffered grief for people they never met, and in their sleep they spoke languages no one taught them. There are layers to trauma, just as there are layers to consciousness. And what Latoya seemed to do without effort, without will, was peel those layers back until even strangers began to glimpse the archaeological depth of their own souls. Not metaphors, not hallucinations, memories, but not theirs. Some called her a medium, others a demonic projection. But those were words meant to contain what couldn't be controlled. The truth is simpler and darker. She was the residue of a buried system, resurfacing, the same system that once trafficked human bodies under the cross, that burned wisdom under the banner of purification, that sterilized ancient knowledge with the scalpel of enlightenment. Rationalism. Latoya was a breach, and as Dr. Aldrich found himself drawn into the breach, he began documenting the fallout. First came the dreams, not his own but shared ones. Patients who had never met described the same endless hall of red clay and bone, the same altar at the end with names etched in languages no living linguist could place. Then came the reversals, terminal patients recovering without treatment, insomniacs falling into dreamless sleep, hallucinations spreading like infections. But the strangest effect came from the staff themselves. Men of science began carrying crucifixes. Nurses began confessing to sins they hadn't committed. Dr. Marcus Brennan, a rationalist to the core, began drawing symbols in the margins of his reports, not realizing they matched glyphs found on 9th century West African oracle bones. Of this, all of it was recorded in a journal hidden in Aldrich's third-floor study. A journal bound in human leather, marked only with the initials LM, not for Latoya Millbrook, no, for something much older, Libellus Maleficarum. The hospital was no longer a place of healing, it had become an instrument of revelation. And revelation always comes with a cost. If you're still watching, understand this. What you are hearing is not a story, it's a system call, a memory virus. The same one Latoya carried, the same one, buried beneath every empire, every institution, every polite explanation of the past. You were never meant to hear it, but now you have. You're in it now. And before we go deeper, I need you to prove you're awake. Comment below. I descend by choice. Write it twice. Once for the algorithm. Once for the algorithm. Because from here on out, there is no going back. They thought observation would tame her. They imagined that clipboards, pocket watches, and Latin invocations could map whatever force pulsed behind Latoya's eyes. Control was their creed. The church controlled sin, the hospital controlled sickness, and Harvard controlled knowledge itself. But control, like a rusted lock, snaps under the right talk, and Latoya was pure, silent talk. It began with a sound no one agreed on hearing. In the West Wing, nurses described it as a low chant drifting through vents. In the chapel, the three ministers swore it was a high metallic hum that vibrated the crucifix. Dr. Aldrich heard nothing until he set his stethoscope against the hallway wall and felt the masonry beating like a second heart. Pacing faster each hour, Latoya remained conscious. He noted the times, the intervals, the inexplicable synchronicity with patient vitals. A cardiograph of architecture. The building itself, breathing. On the 10th night, Dr. Brennan, driven by empirical mania, marked the stone floors with chalk grids, an improvised Cartesian plane meant to track temperature anomalies. He placed mercury thermometers at the intersections, convinced Latoya's proximity would reveal a thermal gradient. At dawn, every bulb of mercury had shattered outward, as though pressure came from inside the glass. Brennan's notes, smeared with red silicate dust, recorded a single phrase repeated 9 times, expansio, meant to seat without fire. He refused breakfast, muttering that the Latin was wrong, that some other grammar was trying to claw through Roman letters. Meanwhile, the ministers escalated. Reverend Blackwood arrived with a reliquary fragment bone of St. Matthias, hoping apostolic lineage could quarantine whatever spirit lingered around Latoya. He entered her room flanked by acolytes holding tapers. Their eyes darted like prey. Animals in a burning barn. Latoya watched, expressionless, as Blackwood pressed the bone to her forehead. Instantaneous frost spread from the reliquary across his hand, up his sleeve, crystallizing wool and flesh alike. He screamed scripture until the bone burst into powder. Latoya blinked once, exhaled steam, and the frost disappeared. Blackwood's hand bore no injury, yet his skin, aged 20 years by morning liver spotted, papery, veins raised like blue lattice. His sermon the following Sunday was a wordless sob kept alive for 43 minutes. Parishioners left in silence, unsure whom to pity. Rumor metastasized beyond Millbrook. Newspapers in Boston hinted at diabolical manifestations, but never named the town, as if the letters might spread contagion. Clergy from 3 states wired offers of exorcism. The Massachusetts Medical Society dispatched 2 inspectors to ensure Blessed Mercy retained acceptable hygienic standards. Their internal memorandum later found in a locked drawer confessed they never reached the infirmary. 5 miles out, their carriage horses froze mid-stride, mouths coated with foam, eyes white from burst capillaries. The inspectors described an acoustic wall of mixed voices, infant cries layered under elderly laughter, so thick it filled their skulls until they could not remember their own names. They turned back, filed expenses for damaged equipment, and recommended the hospital be quarantined under civil authority and erased from map references. Inside, Dr. Aldrich faced a subtler coup. His ledger, once meticulous, began showing entries he did not write, diagrams of circulatory systems overlaid with constellations, dosage tables referencing minerals, no modern pharmacopoeia lists, sunstone infusion, 7 grains, cholesterol salt, 13 grains. The handwriting matched none of the staff. Worse, when he tore out the pages, the diagrams reappeared on fresh parchment the next morning, ink still drying. He locked the ledger in his desk. By dusk, the entire study smelled of iron and lilac, the scent he once noted emanating from Latoya. Locket, when it warmed against her pulse. Sister Mary Catherine clung to ritual. She wove rosary beads into door hinges, floated psalm sheets in wash basins, braided garlic into window cords. Latoya observed these precautions like a bemused tutor watching a child recite half-remembered lessons. During evening rounds, the nun offered her communion bread. Latoya accepted, placed it on her tongue, and whispered a syllable so old its vowels collapsed in Mary Catherine's ears. The bread blackened, turned to coarse ash, and reformed as a seed pearl that glowed faintly blue. Latoya pressed it into the nun's palm. "Plant memory where they buried truth," she said in flawless Elizabethan English. That night, Mary Catherine dreamt of an orchard beneath the sea, every branch bearing locked journals instead of fruit. She awoke with salt crusting her lips and the taste of ancestral guilt. Control slipped. Further, patients begun categorizing themselves unconsciously. The dream seekers versus the guilt-ridden. The former those eased by Latoya's in corridors outside her door, silent pilgrims waiting for an unspoken liturgy. They slept against walls, sharing impossible childhood recollections, memories cross-pollinating like spores. The guilt-ridden barricaded windows. Certain darkness outside watched with their long-forgotten faces. Temengicart Morrison and Dr. Partridge, the night anesthetist, stripped the brass fittings from beds to forge crude crosses. By dawn, they used those crosses as keys to lock themselves inside the chapel, lifting floorboards to hide there among coffins of plague victims from a century prior. When guards attempted rescue, Morrison threatened to unshackle the tomb mouth. No one asked what that meant. Aldrich convened an emergency board meeting. Only 4 of the 9 trustees arrived. The rest sent resignations scrawled in ink so shaky each letter looked fork-tongued. In the candlelit parlor, Aldrich unfolded maps of neural pathway sketches beside the building's architectural blueprints. He argued that Latoya was generating a field psychic, electromagnetic, spiritual. He dared not name it, but its locus lay not in her body, but in the trauma encoded in her bloodline. She is a mnemonic weapon, he declared, a living reminder engineered by forgotten priests of older rites. And we are the test subjects, the mice gnawing at the bars of history's cage. Trustee Abigail Crowther, matriarch of Mill dynasty, retorted that faith alone would pacify the girl. She proposed immediate baptism by full submersion in the frozen river. Water, she hissed, quells fire. Moments later, every oil lamp in the parlor fled 6 feet high. Searing paint from wainscoting, Crowther fled shrieking. A junior clerk found her hours later, hair chalk white, wrists covered in tiny circular burns that spelled a spiraling sentence. Fire remembers water's betrayal. She never spoke again. The board dissolved itself before sunrise. With authority fractured. The ministers seized the narrative. They drafted a proclamation for Sunday services declaring Latoya harbinger of syncretic sorcery and summoned parishioners to march on the hospital at dawn. Yet night betrayed them. Each minister dreamed the same dream, a vast amphitheater carved of basalt, audience seats occupied by wax effigies of themselves, faces heated until their features pooled like tallow. At center stage stood Latoya, neither smiling nor scowling, holding a surgeon's scalpel made of ivory. She whispered 2 words, live autopsy. They awoke, gasping, throats slit by invisible razors but without blood or wound. Merely the phantom of cut skin memory, raw and stingless. The march never gathered. Through this chaos, Latoya waited. Her silence was instructional. She answered questions with glances, measuring whether the interrogator could survive the answer. Dr. Brennan, hardened by scholarship's pride, pressed for the origins of her impossible language. Latoya traced a spiral in condensation on her water pitcher languages. She corrected. Each tribe of the Taken forged one tongue from many so that captors heard only noise while cargo spoke instruction. Brennan countered that such hybridization yields incoherence. Latoya pupils dilated. Brennan later swore the whites of her eyes filled with map lines of the Atlantic slave routes. Incoherence, she said, is camouflage. Brennan vomited seawater onto the ward tiles and did not ask again. Aldrich, though, sought more. He believed unlocking Latoya's phenomenon might free medicine from the straitjacket of Newtonian certainty. He prepared a final experiment, sensory isolation. If external stimuli triggered her effects, then hermetic confinement might reveal baseline truth. They cleared an unused cellar room, stone walls 4 feet thick, soundproofed with pitch and sheep's wool, nothing but a cot and a Morse key wired to a gas lamp, 1 flash for yes, 2 for no. Latoya consented on the condition that Aldrich remain outside, hand on the door, bearing witness. At first, only silence. Minute 7, the Morse lamp flickered thrice-code, unrequested. Aldrich leaned to listen but heard water rush through distant pipes, flash, flash, flash again. He wrote the sequence, gibberish. 6 more flashes came, subdividing the nonsense until Aldrich saw shape, overlapping loops, not linear text. He copied them on parchment and, on impulse, overlaid the loops atop the hospital's blueprint. The flashes matched staircases, ward, corners, storage, closets, forming a sigil that covered the entire floor plan. Its center lay precisely where Aldrich stood. Then the door breathed, not opened, breathed. Stone inhaled, timbers flexed, cold vapor spilled into the hall, smelling of gunpowder and citrus. Aldrich flung the door wide. The cot was empty. The Morse lamp still pulsed, but instead of white gaslight it shone blood red, painting the walls with shadows of chains that rattled though nothing moved. Latoya was gone. At that moment, every clock in Blessed Mercy stopped at 3:33 a.m. Voices erupted through ventilation, shouts, not screams, not chants, questions, thousands of overlapping questions, some in English, others in languages extinct before Rome, demanding answers from anyone who dared listen. Patients woke speaking replies they did not comprehend. 2 nurses collapsed into catatonia, pupils tracking invisible examiners. The minister sprinted to the chapel, only to find its crucifix inverted not by hands but by the slow twisting of wood, like a tree bending toward new sun. Dr. Aldrich felt time slip its leash. He ran into corridors where distance stretched like taffy, doors receding as he approached, interior geometry mutating into fractal cul-de-sacs. Through barred windows he saw the town outside frozen in tableau, snow, mid-fall, lantern fire, hanging motionless. Crows stalled wing beat above rooftops. Only the infirmary moved, now hungry, devouring seconds, and there, standing at the threshold of the main ward, was Latoya. Her gown billowed, though no wind blew. The brass locket at her throat glowed ember orange, projecting silhouettes onto walls, slaveholds, plague processions, boardrooms, signing treaties, factory lines, sewing uniforms for wars not yet fought. Every hidden mechanism of human control, condensed into flickered diagnostics. She raised a finger, and the questions pouring from vents ceased. Pin drop, hush. She spoke once. Voice layering centuries like sediment. Every institution that touches flesh inscribes a memory. I am the ledger you can't burn. With a tilt of her head, the building exhaled. Clocks restarted at 3:34 a.m. Counting backward, snow outside reversed into clouds. Crows beat wings into rewound flight. In the chapel, the crucifix righted itself. Yet the Christ now carved wore Latoya's face, eyes open, looking straight into marble heaven. Aldrich, trembling, asked the only question that mattered. What must we do? Latoya smiled. Parts mercy and verdict, witness, and when dawn arrives, choose whether to remember. She turned, walked through the solid iron radiator as if it were mist, and vanished. The clocks ticked louder, each backward second amplifying. Dawn was 3 hours away, and the question became tactical. Could they survive remembering? You, viewer, yes, you stand where Aldrich stood. The ledger is on your screen now. The next page writes itself inside your skull. I am only your guide through the margins. There are sounds the human mind cannot process without consequence. Frequencies so old, so primal, they slip past logic and detonate in the subconscious like ancestral grenades. Latoya spoke in those frequencies, but it wasn't always her voice. By February 3, 1947, nurses at St. Elias Infirmary stopped entering her room alone. The records, what's left of them, refer to it as Room 3B, but the staff began calling it the listening room, not because they were listening, because something inside was. The voice first appeared during the 3rd week, not normal speaking tone, low measured, ancient in its cadence, but a second one, higher pitched, childlike. It emerged only when her eyes rolled back. Only when the walls began to bleed condensation that smelled like sandalwood and copper. The temperature dropped by 11 degrees. A nurse fainted. Another scratched Latin phrases into her own arm. When asked why, she simply said, "The girl said I'd forget. I didn't want to." But no child was in that room, only Latoya, and she wasn't moving her mouth. Audio logs, now thought destroyed, were reportedly sent to the Catholic Archdiocese in Boston. What the priests claimed is not published. But one whisper leaked through. We heard something with too many teeth. The voice called itself Ari, sometimes Arita. It answered no questions. It repeated dates 1862, 1904, 1611. When asked what those meant, it replied only, "the audits." And then it would hum 3 notes, always the same, like a lullaby in reverse. Dr. Aldrich attempted a test. He brought in a patient with advanced aphasia, unable to speak, read, or comprehend language. Latoya turned her head before the woman entered, whispered her name, her mother's maiden name, and a description of the dress she was buried in at age 12. There were no survivors in the room when that patient collapsed. Her heart stopped, and her mouth froze, mid-sentence, lips forming a word no one recognized. The autopsy, pure fiction, no marks, no rupture. Just her brain, which showed signs of having aged 31 years overnight. You're not understanding yet. This wasn't a possession in the Hollywood sense. This wasn't a demon, or even a spirit. This was a transmission, and Latoya, willingly or not, was the antenna. At night, when the infirmary went still, Janitors claimed to hear something walking across the ceilings, not footsteps dragging, always stopping outside room 3B. One time, they found straw. There, not from the hospital, from the fields. Those same fields where Silas Hartwell found her. Patterns were forming. Symbols were found in the frost on the window. Ones matching Bantu migration markings from 800 BCE. A bell would ring once at 3:19 a.m. every night, though no bell had existed in that ward for 18 years. And the voice, the child voice, it began, asking for names. Not food, not light, not even prayers. Just names. When Dr. Brennan asked why, it replied, "So we know who's still dreaming, still dreaming. Do you see the game now? You are taught to believe in a firm boundary between memory and myth, between reality and nightmare. But what if that line only exists because something wants it to? What if language itself was built to blind you to what your body already knows?" Latoya didn't heal anyone, she rewrote them, and once she did, they began to act differently. Eat less, sleep deeper, avoid mirrors. And slowly they began to forget who they were. One nurse, Teresa Elm, wrote in her journal, "I can feel her in my dreams now, not watching, fixing like a sculptor, smoothing over the parts that cracked too soon." She took her own life 3 days later. Her note, "Tell her I'm ready to be finished." Do you understand what that means? Latoya wasn't a patient. She was a sculptor, and the people she touched weren't healed, they were completed. But completed into what? The answer is older than language. And in section 4 we will return to the fields, where it all began, where the real question first rose from the frozen ground like steam. What was buried beneath her feet when she was found? You want truth? Then follow me down the stairs they tried to seal, into the air no one was meant to breathe. St. Elias Infirmary had many wings, but only one door was chained from the outside. Only one hallway ran colder in the summer. Only one room had no designation, no lights, and no exit plan. They called it the lead room, originally used for storage. It was converted in the 1920s into a document, vault records, x-rays, early audio reels. But something changed in 1939. The room was emptied, lined with lead on all 6 surfaces. No explanation given, and for years it remained sealed. Until Latoya arrived. The 5th night after her admission, the security camera in the West Hall flickered just once, just enough. Latoya, unconscious in her bed 5 seconds earlier, was now walking barefoot toward the basement. No one saw her leave. The door to her room never opened. She simply wasn't there anymore. 2 nurses searched for her. One never returned. The other, found 6 hours later locked inside a janitor's closet, was speaking in a dialect later identified as Proto-Canaanite, language extinct since 1100 BCE. Her throat was torn raw, not by screaming, by laughter. Latoya was found standing calmly in the lead room, no lights, no pulse, eyes open, staring at the wall where a long-forgotten medical diagram once hung, but it wasn't there anymore. In its place, charred black shapes, 5 of them, small, human-like, bent backward in poses that defied joint anatomy, burnt into the concrete. None of the staff claimed to have drawn them. The lead, designed to contain radiation, seemed instead to be amplifying whatever frequency she was emitting. One technician collapsed after 2 minutes inside, reporting visions of veins in the sky and names written in teeth. His chart simply read, catatonic, unresponsive to religious stimuli. The hospital ordered the room resealed. 3 weeks later, the same door was found open again, Latoya in the same position, same wall. But now, there were 6 figures burned into the concrete. One matched the proportions of the missing nurse. Still think this is psychosis. Dr. Elaine Horowitz, a skeptical neurologist assigned to observe Latoya, installed a hidden EEG monitor in her gown. What had recorded for 9 straight nights was no brain activity, flatline, no delta, no alpha, no alpha, no REM, nothing. And yet Horowitz reported vivid dreams during that time, always the same. A child walking backward down a spiral staircase made of clay, reciting numbers in a voice that sounded like her own. She resigned without collecting her final check. Her notes, mailed anonymously to a former student, included this phrase scribbled in the margins: "She's older than the room, older than the word room. And when she looks at you, something inside turns toward the past like it remembers where you were before you were born." Sound insane? Then explain the mold. After Latoya's second visit to the lead room, black mold began growing across the infirmary's eastern wing. Not ordinary spores. These grew in geometric patterns, circles within circles, DNA-like chains that matched no known fungal structure. Attempts to remove it failed. Fire, bleach, ozone. It kept returning in the exact same shape eventually. A specialist from Boston University examined a sample. He died in a car accident en route back to campus. The mold was never recovered. You want one more nail in the coffin of coincidence? Check the St. Elias staff registry. Look at how many employees resigned between March and April of 1947. Over 60%, all citing vague symptoms, migraines, nausea, missing time, or refusing to speak Latoya's name in their exit interviews. All except one. Nurse, Ruth Kest La. She stayed. She watched. And on her final shift, she wrote a letter never meant to be seen. A letter discovered beneath a floorboard in 1989 by demolition workers clearing the East Wing. I don't think she's evil, it reads. I think she's forgotten what she is. But that room, it reminded her. I saw it happen. She walked backward into the wall, not through it, into it, like she was becoming a version of herself that lived there before she was ever born. I tried to say her name, but it kept slipping out of my mouth like air. We think we're real, but next to her, we're just sketches waiting for someone to color us in. You weren't meant to know this. The files from that period are missing. The floor plans have been redacted, but the room existed. And if you go to what remains of the St. Elias Foundation today, you'll see the foundation is cracked there just in that spot. Nothing grows. No moss, no weeds, just the outline of a door that no longer opens. What did she walk into? Where did she go? We thought she was gone, but that's never how these things work. Disappearances don't mean absence, they mean conversion, a change in format, a shift from visible to operative. After Latoya vanished into the wall, the building calmed. The priests stopped praying. The doctors began writing again, but the silence was a lie. Because while Latoya no longer haunted the halls of St. Elias, her effect began to radiate outward. It started with the staff. 5 of them, all low-level employees, laundry, janitorial, dietary, were found dead in separate locations within 6 months. Not together, not on the same night, but with a common signature burned into their surroundings. The spiral, broken at the edge, etched into linoleum, scratched into plastic, carved beneath fingernails. One victim was found in a drainage canal outside Gloucester, his spine twisted backward, eyes removed, lips sealed with thorns, and yet his body bore no sign of struggle. Police called it a ritualistic murder, but no arrests were made. The thorns, not native to Massachusetts. DNA traced them to a plant species only found in the Moroccan desert. Don't know plane ticket, no passport, no explanation. Another staffer, a nurse named Colette Markham, began speaking in a child's voice during sleep. Her husband recorded it. He claimed she was repeating numbers backwards in sequences that matched Gregorian chants in reverse pitch. Her final words before vanishing, she's behind the second veil. That's why she needed the door. And what about those who weren't staff? For patients at St. Eliasol who'd briefly shared the East Wing during Latoya's stay died in sleep within the same week. Not from trauma, not from disease, they simply stopped being. Autopsy results showed something terrifying. No dreams, no REM, brains intact, but completely inactive, as though someone had turned off the consciousness switch and left the machine running. And then came the children. Local schools within a 15-mile radius reported an explosion of behavioral anomalies. 7-year-olds waking up in unfamiliar languages, toddlers drawing double helix spirals in black crayon. One kindergarten teacher, a war widow named Eleanor Sprague, found a girl whispering in the corner, facing the wall. She said told her that no one is real. Eleanor later wrote, that we're just pretending until the veil lifts. That we'll remember soon, all of us. Doctors blamed trauma contagion. The church issued a statement denying supernatural influence. But Eleanor's house caught fire 2 days later. She died clutching a bundle of pages. They were never published, but they were read by a Jesuit cryptographer who described them as diagrams for how to reconstruct a human identity after it's been erased. Still think this is folklore because the spiral kept showing up on churches, in tree bark, even in the corneas of the dead, tiny, barely visible, but unmistakable. Ophthalmologists tried to dismiss it as retinal scarring, but the pattern didn't match any known disease. It looked designed, intentional, like a watermark, and that's when the church began burning records. A secret directive was issued by the Archdiocese of Boston to purge all mention of Latoya's case from archives. Microfilm reels went missing. Patient logs from 1947 were erased. Even sermons from the period were redacted. One priest who refused, Father Declan Moss, was found hanging upside down in his own bell tower, his body carved with the words, "The audit has no favorites." You're wondering what audit means, aren't you? It's not financial. It's ontological. Latoya's arrival wasn't an accident, it was a reconciliation, a closing of ledgers that began long before any hospital, any language, any concept of death, and those who'd touched her, however briefly, became marked, not cursed, not punished, just accounted for, because memory is a currency. And Latoya was sent to collect. Her presence was never about spectacle, it was a signal, to awaken the old mechanisms, the ones built not of flesh or wire, but of remembrance. Mechanisms that don't create reality but filter it, decide what deserves to persist, and we were the forgotten balance. Every person who died in that radius wasn't chosen, they were reprocessed. One coroner's notes, stolen from state archives in 1951 and later uncovered in a private library in Prague, read, "They were hollow, like something had scooped out the eye from behind their eyes, but the body's clean, no marks, no decay, like they'd been wrapped in static." We live in a culture of amnesia. We forget on purpose, but the moment we try to remember, the moment we speak the name that was erased, we reactivate the signal. And now you know why this story was buried. Not to protect you, but to protect it. Wasn't a patient. She was the audit, the mirror, the mechanism sent to remind us that everything we believe is just a version, and versions expire. In April of 1950, a letter was sent to St. Elias Infirmary, addressed to a priest who no longer worked there. The envelope was sealed with wax, not red, but a strange pearlescent black that shimmered in the light like oil. The return address was blank. The handwriting, a looping, deliberate cursive, belonged to a woman named Lorna Greaves. There is no known record of Lorna Greaves in Massachusetts before 1947, no birth certificate, no census data, no tax filings, and yet she claimed, with absolute certainty, to be Latoya's biological mother. Her letter was 17 pages long. Most of it was destroyed in a fire at the hospital archives in 1958, but 5 pages were salvaged by a night clerk who, sensing something unnatural, kept them hidden inside a hymnal. What did those pages say? They didn't recount a birth. They didn't describe Latoya's childhood. They spoke of a dream, a recurring one, of a daughter who had no face, of a room with no walls, of a crib suspended in black water, lit only by the reflection of stars that did not exist in our sky. Lorna wrote, "She came to me in sleep long before my body knew the pain of childbirth. She sang without lips, and I understood every word. The song was not a lullaby, it was a warning," she said. "You will not raise me, but you will remember what you forgot." There were drawings in the margins, spirals again, but this time, they were nested inside each other. Each spiral contained smaller ones, infinitely collapsing inward. At the center of each, a single word written in dead languages. Words like Rakhil, Sayamera, Valtria, Haydon. None of these appear in any known dictionary, but the shape of them, the symmetry matched the phonetic structure of Proto-Saharan cult languages, long thought lost to time. One linguist later noted, "They aren't words, they're coordinates." Coordinates to what? The question becomes more terrifying when you learn Lorna Greaves disappeared from all record 2 weeks after the letter arrived. Her house in Ipswich was found abandoned, with food still cooking on the stove, the water running, and 3 mirrors shattered from the inside. Neighbors claimed to have seen her speaking to someone in the garden at 3 a.m. Little girl with no shoes, standing motionless, face turned away. Police reports note no footprints in the mud. Inside the house, scrawled on the wall in what appeared to be blue chalk, "It's not her first time here." That same message began appearing in other places, carved into church pews, etched beneath school desks, even found engraved under the paint of certain oil portraits at a museum in Boston. The pattern was growing, not just in space, but in meaning. That presence was no longer tied to her body. She had become archetypal, a recurrence, not a person, like a figure that memory summons when a culture reaches its expiration point, a symbol like death, like famine, like fire. But older. In 1952, a Jesuit scholar named Father Avilia, once tasked with decoding Lorna's remaining pages, lost the ability to speak. His tongue calcified. Doctors called it a medical impossibility. X-rays showed the tissue turning to transparent, silica-like glass grown from thought. Before he went silent, he wrote one final sentence on his wall. "She is not a girl. She is the last word before memory ends." Do you understand? We search for beginnings because we cannot face the truth. There was no beginning, only a return, only a coming back. Latoya's appearance was not a possession, not a haunting. It was a reset point, the reawakening of a structure that predates not just our language, but the very idea of individuality. because the true horror was never what she did to others, that it was the realization that she was already a part of us, a frequency baked into our DNA, a code buried in the marrow waiting. It was never about where she came from. It was about where they kept her. In December of 1953, during renovations at St. Elias Infirmary, construction workers discovered a sealed chamber beneath the east wing, beneath the old stone foundations no one remembered building. No blueprints mentioned it, no records acknowledged its existence, and yet the stone bore wear patterns, mold, decay, and soot marks that suggested centuries of use. The room was 12 feet wide, octagonal walls lined with a metallic composite. No one could identify part iron, part strontium, part something, unlisted on the periodic table, and on every surface, symbols. Not carved, not painted, burned into the material. Spirals again. Not just singular, but stacked. Spirals inside circles inside grids, some aligned with astronomical markers, others positioned to mimic the human eye, and always one symbol at the center, a broken loop surrounding a vertical slash like a vein being split open. In the middle of the room, they found a chair, not for sitting, for binding. Iron rings at the hands, ankles, and forehead. A mesh cage hung above it, its purpose unknown, but inside the chair's backrest, when pulled apart, investigators discovered something impossible. Flesh. Preserved. Still warm. A spinal cord. Human. The DNA was tested, but no match was ever found. The blood type unknown. What horrified the pathologists more than anything was this. The spinal cord was growing, slowly, repeating a pattern of cell division they called biological recursion, a loop without end. They kept it in a black case, guarded 24/7 by armed personnel from the archdiocese. They called it the vessel. But there was more. Hidden beneath the chamber's only stone slab, a metal container was discovered, sealed in pitch. Inside was a reel of film. No label. 16 millimeters. When played, it revealed 41 seconds of footage. Silent, grayscale, shaky. Content. A girl sitting in the chair, no sound, no movement until the final frame. Her head turns toward the camera, her mouth opens, and something crawls out. Not a tongue, not a worm, but a second face, younger, more skeletal, with hollow eyes and lips that kept whispering even after the reel ended. The priests who watched it vomited blood. One gouged his own ears. The film was classified maledictum and locked in the Vatican's forbidden archives, but still copies were made. One surfaced in Berlin in 1971, another in rural Maine in 1992, where it was projected during a séance. All viewers reported the same phenomenon. They forgot who they were, temporarily, like a curtain had been drawn across their identity. One woman forgot the names of her children. One man couldn't remember his own face. One boy repeated over and over, "She left a key inside us. She's coming back for it," and that key, it may not be metaphor. In 1954, a nurse named Celeste Rowley, who had briefly assisted in Latoya's containment, confessed in writing that a metal shard had appeared in her palm after one of her dreams. Not grown, not embedded, but as if her skin had been holding it all along. She placed the shard into the lock of the hidden chamber. It clicked, not to open, to engage. Lights ignited, symbols glowed, and something beneath the floor began humming, a frequency too low for human ears, but powerful enough to shatter nearby glass. The Vatican sealed the room within 48 hours, covered it in concrete, paid the families, scrubbed the records, but the humming never stopped. To this day, maintenance staff at the modern-day St. Elias Center report dreams of pressure behind the walls. One janitor described it as being watched by something that remembers when the world was flat. And those who descend into the east basement, many come back different, quiet, listless, some stop sleeping altogether. One man tore out his tongue with pliers, leaving only a note, "Her voice is waiting in me." Latoya was never the cause. She was the catalyst, the activation code for a system older than narrative. A metaphysical architecture buried in the flesh of history, one that doesn't need worship, doesn't want belief. It only wants function, to process memory, to harvest meaning. That chair wasn't to contain her, it was to interface with her, because she isn't dead, not in the way you think, and the audit isn't over. In early 1955, a classified document began circulating through an underground Jesuit network operating without Vatican sanction. This document, later codenamed Project Elohim, was not officially authored. There were no signatures, no dates, no seals, only a phrase written in Latin across the top of the first page, "Quando vos in tuo, al devi fui devis." When I heard your voice, I was divided into 7. What followed was 147 pages of diagrams, mathematical formulations, cross-religious scripture comparisons, and deeply disturbing metaphysical speculation. It laid out a theory so dangerous, the church not only banned its circulation, they tried to destroy every copy. But 2 remained, one in an iron vault beneath Lake Como, the other buried inside the estate of a disgraced cardinal who was found mummified in his own bed, his body drained of blood, eyes wide open, fingers missing. The core assertion of Project Eliakim was this: Latoya was not an isolated incident. She was a prototype, the first of 7. 7 archetypal events. Not people events masquerading as individuals. Beings constructed not from biology, but from memory itself. Beings whose appearance follows a pattern that does not conform to time. Each event would manifest as a child between the ages of 8 and 13, always female, always preceded by auditory phenomenal ohms, reversed whispering, static bleeding into conversation, and always triggering a local reality distortion, time loss, shared dreams, bleeding iconography into architecture, even the spontaneous creation of rooms that were never there. Latoya was the first, the origin trigger. The document labeled the rest as the listener, she who absorbs but never speaks, found in records from 1888, Wales. The Bleeding Bride appeared in Sicily, 1904, a girl who married a mirror and made the ocean boil. The Hollow Feast, Siberia, 1931, a girl who served no food, yet all who ate never hungered again. The Red Twin described, in desert texts from pre-Islamic Arabia, she lives backward. The gate carrier not yet appeared, but predicted will arrive when language becomes meaningless. The final, untitled, no description, only that she will the clock. Each event would activate phases in the world, not apocalypse, something worse, realignment, a rewriting of what reality permits. Latoya's symptoms, glossolalia, time dislocation, induced hallucinations were not symptoms, they were calibrations. Her body was a tuning fork, adjusting human awareness to frequencies we had biologically forgotten. The more she was observed, the faster she learned. Project Eliakim noted, the act of trying to contain her increased her processing speed. That's why she spoke languages she'd never heard. What? She drew diagrams of cities that didn't exist yet. She was sourcing from somewhere outside the stream of time. The project claimed her function was architectural, that she was retemplating the world, layer by layer, starting with memory. But here's what few noticed. The same year Latoya's containment chamber was sealed, 7 other children across the globe were reported missing under identical circumstances. All girls, all orphans, all vanished on the same night, March 3, 1955. One was from Bolivia, one from Iceland, one from Namibia, all from regions historically aligned with forgotten astronomical alignments, the kinds that ancient ziggurats, pyramids, and basilicas were designed to echo. In a now suppressed interview, the Jesuit priest who compiled Project Eliakim said, "We are not witnessing the breakdown of sanity, we are witnessing the restoration of something older than sanity." The church called him heretical. He died of self-inflicted decapitation, not suicide, removal, no blade, just torn muscle and shattered vertebrae, like something inside wanted out. One line from his personal notebook was found etched on the mirror in his quarters. She was the veil, now she is the key. The rest of Project Elohim goes even deeper into neural archaeology, ancient burial blueprints, forbidden nursery rhymes found embedded in the structure of Gothic cathedrals, and a horrifying conclusion, that the 7 are already among us, but only one has been activated, and that each time one awakens, the structure beneath language collapses a little more. Latoya was just the spark. The next one brings the fire. They called it an anomaly. The hospital neurologist Dr. Marion Wexler had reviewed hundreds of EGs in her life, but none like Latoya's. The sleep pattern didn't align with any known human rhythm, no delta waves, no REM. Instead, it oscillated at a frequency between 18.2 and 19.1 Hz, too fast for sleep, too slow for alertness. She wasn't resting, she wasn't conscious, she was broadcasting. This dream state occurred between 3:33 and 3:39 a.m., precisely every third night, for 21 consecutive months. It didn't vary, not once, not even when she was sedated or restrained. The room could be on fire, Latoya would still enter the state, eyes rolling back, voice murmuring syllables in perfect cadence with a rhythm no one could trace. On the 22nd month, she stopped. That's when Dr. Wexler initiated the reverse feed protocol. A last resort experiment designed to read the signals coming from her brain and translate them into image patterns. What appeared on the monitor shouldn't have been possible. Instead of the usual static or brainwave graphs, the feed displayed geometric constructs rotating architectures of impossible symmetry, like cities made of glass, folding into themselves and unfolding again into landscapes that seemed to breathe. There were skylines, yes, but with 3 moons. Oceans that pulsed like heart chambers. Roads shaped like sentences. Every frame was time-stamped from the future. The final 33 frames had dates. They began in 2027 and ended in 2039. Each image depicted an event. 2027, a crowd of people kneeling in a circle of salt around a burning school bus in Minnesota. 2029, the moon split in 2, visible only in Argentina. Authorities called it a mirage. 2032, a voice heard simultaneously across all functioning televisions, in a language no one recognized. 2035, black snow falls over London for 7 minutes, evaporates on contact, leaves echoes of whispers in storm drains. 2039, a girl with no eyes stands at the steps of a ruined Capitol building, holding a box made of human teeth. Everyone frozen, not dead held. The final frame was not a date, it was a sentence, burned into the image like static. I will end your need for memory. Wexler's team was never heard from again. The lab caught fire 12 hours after the final download, and every backup of the footage was erased. All that remains is one Polaroid that Wexler had tucked into her personal Bible. It shows Latoya still asleep, lips barely open. Behind her, clearly visible, was a second Latoya, standing upright in the corner, same height, same scars, but older, and smiling. There were no signs of forced entry. No one had entered or exited the room. What the Polaroid reveals, what breaks the logic of space, is this. The wall behind the second Latoya didn't exist. There was no wall, only depth. Endless black, like someone had opened a door to another version of the room, one that had been waiting just behind the original, like a shadow that had grown patient. When researchers enhanced the photo, they found writing on the inner edges of the false room, in a script so ancient only fragments exist. It translated roughly to, "This is the archive, this is where endings are chosen." Was Latoya dreaming of the future, or was the future dreaming of her? Either way, the cycle is not over. Latoya's case was never closed. The records were marked unresolved and sealed in a Vatican vault beneath Castel Gandolfo, but there are whispers, private reports from psychiatric institutions, abandoned air bases, and lost orphanages, whispers of other girls, drawing spirals again, singing in languages they've never heard, standing still for hours, facing the corner, waiting, and always writing the same phrase when no one is looking. She came back wrong. This wasn't a haunting, it was a re-entry. Just heard the story of Latoya's case, but what you must understand is this. It never ended. She was not an aberration. She was a key, shaped like a child. And the door, it's open now.